Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild Magic Item and Spell Collection Vault of Magic by Marco Bertini and Marco Fossati for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, and Rivzung, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marco Stewart, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, A.K., Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, and Sam. Thank you all very much for your support. This is officially my first DM's Guild review with the new headset. So if I sound a little bit different, I have gotten a new headset this week. I'll be talking about that a lot. So hopefully it is as good, if not better, voice quality than what we had before. So Vault of Magic adds new magic items and some spells. 55 new magic items and 16 new spells. Most of which, from what I can tell, are at least the items lower level, a lot of like common and uncommon, which is probably a pretty good way to go about it. Really, really good presentation, very professionally laid out and organized. Some really nice artwork throughout, so I love the actual visual presentation. I'm less enthusiastic about the actual content inside. For the most part, a lot of the magic items tend to play it pretty safe and a little bit boring. It's like, you know, a magical suit of armor that just lets you cast a spell, and it does that like 4 times. And then here's a cloak that also lets you cast a spell. I feel like that's like the lowest rung of what a clever magic item is. Well, I guess the lowest rung is like a +1 or, you know, +1 armor, +1 sword, or whatever. But like the next lowest is like, this just gives you the ability to cast this kind of spell. We're going to go through it pretty quickly because it's only about 20 or so pages, which thank goodness, because I do not want to review another 300 and 400 page adventure compilation anytime soon. So as I mentioned, really, really great artwork and presentation throughout here. It's a lot of, it is some stock photos. I don't know how much is stock and how much is original artwork in here, but either way, very, very impressive. I don't think there's a single page that doesn't feature artwork on it, and especially for magic items, that's really cool to see. I love being able to visualize a lot of these magic items. I know that's a complaint I've had in the past for magic item collections that did not have much artwork, so this is the opposite end of the spectrum, where it does have a lot of artwork, and not only does it look really cool, but functionally, I mean, it does help. It'd be really cool also if a lot of these compilations actually had separate handouts for those of us that actually would like to give our players pictures of their items. I think that is really cool. If you're going to bother to put artwork on it, then why not include separate handouts that you could then give to players with that piece of equipment on there. I think that would be going a little bit above and beyond. And that's something that Roll20 does. For example, if you buy a module, if a magic item does have artwork on it, which not all of them do, but in the Dungeon Master's guidebook, there's plenty of art. They're included as separate handouts with that art on there, so you can actually give that to your players as a handout, which is really cool to see. So as I mentioned, a lot of the items just kind of play it safe when it comes to what they can do, which I wasn't too much of a big fan of. It's not terribly impressive. Like the Armor of Fear, +1 armor, and it lets you cast the Fear spell. Armor of Haste, +1 to AC, and lets you cast the Haste spell. It's not terribly interesting. I mean, it's not bad, but it's almost the kind of thing that I would get from like a random loot generator, you know, that would just be like, hey, give me this item, and then combine that with a spell, and then there's your magic item. You know, I don't see it as being particularly clever or inventive, and a lot of them are unfortunately kind of like that. Armor of Curing lets you cast the Cure Wound spell. The arrows are a little bit more interesting, and I really like the idea of having magical arrows, especially because that's a useful, finite magical item that you can give your players, which is always a great balancing tool, because you can be worried about giving low-level players powerful equipment that recharges and it becomes more dependent and they overuse this item, whereas something that has a finite resource, for example, arrows or a special arrow, you can be a little bit more liberal with giving players access to those kinds of items, because they have to then choose, okay, is this a situation that really demands the use of this particular item? And there's some cool ones here. Arrow of Blinding and you still have to make the attack, and then once it hits, then the effect goes off in kind of an explosion with a saving throw for all the enemies. So Arrow of Blinding, obviously they can be blinded if they fail the saving throw. Arrow of Darkness gets plunged into the like a fog cloud or darkness spell effect. Arrow of Holding is like the hold person effect. It's, again, you're marrying spells to an item, but at least with arrows, that's a lot more interesting. And there's a bunch included here. That is really interesting, and something I've played with a little bit in my own campaigns in terms of here's a useful finite magic item you can give to people, even if using a bow isn't their primary thing, but as long as they have the capability of using a ranged weapon, they might be like, okay, this would be a cool chance for me to do my dark arrow and then plunge everybody into darkness. That's just a useful effect without having to use an actual spell, and then they lose that arrow in the process. So I do like that idea, even if they're not particularly clever in this case, because it's just, again, marrying a magic item to a single spell. Some of them are ones that I would never even use because I don't even use those rules. For example, there's ones about encumbrance, like Boots of Carrying. They just double your carrying capacity. That stuff doesn't really matter to me in our campaigns. A Bow of Far Distance just doubles your range. The nice thing is some of these items, they do feel balanced for common and uncommon, although I think it does stretch the definition of what common can be, because a common magic item is really, really basic. From what I remember, and there was hardly any in the Player's Handbook. That was a complaint that the community had, and then when Wizards released Xanathar's Guide to Everything, they included a lot more common magic items, which those are designed for low level, and I mean like level 1 and 2 players that don't upset the balance too much. So very basic, like it's a candle that doesn't go out if it's windy, or something, very, very basic, or a cloak that constantly billows. Not really anything that has anything to do with combat for the most part, but is kind of a fun thing to give players. It's just a little bit of magical funness without necessarily having to give them even. So, I mean, they're basically worse than like a +1 sword, in other words, worse in terms of like the magical loot. So I have a bit of a problem with some of these common items. I just don't know what it's very difficult for me to comment on balance when I'm reviewing these things. Obviously, I'm not sitting here playtesting these, so I can't speak to the balance, although D&D is a tough thing to balance to begin with. But when you have these potions, I have to skip ahead to the potion section. Again, love the artwork, love the presentation here. I just think that they're way too powerful. I don't know. Giving the abilities, the character's ability to gain dark vision, or essentially the freedom of movement spell, or doubling your well, I guess that one's uncommon, the proficiency bonus for an hour. Levitation, yeah, just a little bit too powerful for what a common item is. Even though it's a potion, I don't know. The balance level seems just a little bit off to me here. And there's a common one that you can make your ability score an 18 for a minute. So you could drink that before combat and suddenly gain a pretty good modifier. That's a lot more than a candle that won't go out in the wind kind of a thing. So again, I realize they're potions, so obviously it's very finite. And I do always like seeing potions. Every single magic item collection has to include new potions. And I do appreciate potions. But again, you see that same kind of, potion of defense, drink it and you're a +1 AC. These are very, very easy to come up with basic magic items that aren't particularly inventive or interesting, which is what I'm really looking for with a magic item collection. I want something where it's like, that gives me a good idea that I would not have thought of, or that I don't think a random magic loot generator would have thought of in terms of just in terms of putting those things together. So good examples of magic items. This Shadow Cloak, which I don't think has a image associated with it, but you can use a action to cast darkness, or you can use it has a bunch of charges. You can use an action to become a shadow, which is just really neat. I like that idea. And then the Shield of Electricity allows you to charge the shield with electrical force as a bonus action, and then when the next time you're hit with a melee attack, you can then expend that electrical force as a reaction, I believe, whenever you are struck with a hit, although it does insane amounts of damage, 8d6 lightning damage. They do get a con saving throw, though. So that's a cool idea. You're charging it with force, and it requires the players to do something else. That at least puts a little more thought into the process, rather than this is a shield that lets you cast lightning bolt, essentially. Give me something that requires a little more. It's a little more unique, has a little more usage that players have to pay attention to and know when to use. That's the kind of stuff that I'm actually looking for with magic items. And I feel like the ones I just mentioned, like Shadow Cloak and Shield of Electricity, are unfortunately the rare ones. Most of them are just pretty by the numbers, easy magic items that don't feel particularly clever. Dagger of Sounding is a little more interesting. You can find secret doors with that one. Gauntlets of Heat, like you use a bunch of different fire-based spells with charges. That's at least something. But I like the Dagger of Armor Piercing. I like when weaker weapons get more powerful attacks, because that has players have to make that important decision of, do I use this lower damage weapon to gain the better effects of this magic item? Because obviously a lot of rogues are going to use the rapiers or equivalent of that to get the higher damage. In this case, Dagger of Armor Piercing negates basically all the armor class bonuses of whatever you're fighting against, including mage armor, shield, or bark skin. So it can go through a DM's creature's shield, which would aggravate the hell out of them, and reducing their AC to just 10 plus their dex modifier. So that's actually really, really cool, and especially sexy for rogues, where a lot of their damage is based on their sneak attack anyway and not their weapon. So that actually seems really, really powerful. But again, it's an uncommon item and requires attunement, which is good. Uncommon, that seems really powerful to be able to just negate armor class altogether, as well as go through spells. But it's hard for me to comment on the balance, but it just feels like this one needed another pass with the balance testing. But I realize that's a very, very difficult thing to test, and balance is a hell of a thing in D&D regardless. It also includes spells. We get 16 new spells. And again, same great layout, same great presentation, same great art. But again, I'm not super impressed with the actual content of the spell. Some of them just seem very odd, very bizarrely, specifically situational. Like Black Mantle's a 5th level spell where they get a con saving throw and then they're unable to regain hit points. That's very, very specific. Just any enemies, I guess, that would heal a lot or regenerate, you could use that on. But still, I think you'd rather just do raw damage at that point. The ones that I do like, Battle Arms, which is a dumb name, lets you grow additional arms out of your body, and that lets you do, of course, different things. You can use attack action more often, or you have advantage on melee spell attacks. I just like the visual there of just growing arms out of your body. And I also liked Thunder Lance, where you create a magical spear of pure energy. The lance itself isn't that interesting, but what makes it interesting, you then have to make a spell attack with it, and then it does some damage. But what I like is that if you are hit with a magic missile spell, it will absorb that spell. Let's see, is it magic missile specifically? While you hold the spell, you can use reaction to absorb. Yeah, the darts of the magic missile spell target at you, and that increases the damage of your Thunder Lance. Now, I like the idea behind that, not necessarily that exact thing, because how often are you going to specifically be attacked with magic missile? I like the idea of making some kind of magic weapon, and then while you have it out and equipped, in theory, you can sit there and absorb other spells at you to bump up your damage. I like that idea because it adds a little tactical choice and risk reward for the player, in that, do I then immediately use this magical weapon that I have, or do I sit here and let it charge up and try to build up energy because I know enemies are going to be casting spells at me, and then make it more powerful. So I do like the idea behind that one, even though if I don't necessarily like the fact that it's specifically tied to magic missiles. Shadow Armor, which is kind of similar to the reason I like the Shadow Cloak. You can summon a shadow and have it merge with your own shadow. So instead of turning into a shadow, you basically have this shadow which absorbs all your hits, so you gain, essentially a big chunk of temporary hit points, as well as I believe it can make reaction attacks for you whenever you are hit. So that's really cool. It doesn't even require concentration. 4th level spell. That's neat. I like that a lot. But a lot of them are just bizarre. You sense the nearest source of running water, which is weird. I get these are cantrips, so they're not, stuff for exhaustion. That would be a pain in the ass if I was a DM. I don't want to have to keep track of exhaustion on my players. Call for the Woods. You can warn every denizen of the forest of CR 1/8 or lower to be frightened of you in a 1 mile radius for a 2nd level spell. I don't know why that's not just a cantrip for like 10 feet or something. It seems like that's just an aesthetic thing. You walk through the woods and like creatures part in front of you. That seems like something you would just cast to make your character look cool rather than have any kind of actual functionality. Entrust the Beast is super bizarre. It seems like it has the exact same effects of Animal Friendship, which I believe is a 1st level spell. You can essentially charm a beast of CR 1 or lower, which I don't believe Animal Friendship has a CR limit. And then I guess you could order them to guard a creature or site. But again, that depends on what you can do with Animal Friendship versus what does the DM let you do. But still, for a 4th level spell, I expected a lot more out of Entrust the Beast versus something like Animal Friendship. So there's some good stuff in here, but for the most part, I thought the stuff that I wasn't impressed with outweighed the good, and unfortunately that was pretty much the same case with the magic item. So as much as I love the visual presentation of this whole thing, I just wish there were more interesting or different or unique ideas in both the magic items and the spells listed here. Let's go over my pros and cons for Vault of Magic. Pros, over 50 new magic items and over a dozen new spells. Quantity isn't everything, but it is something. It does include quite a few number of new things. Pro, there is a ton of great item and stock art, including great cover art here. The presentation is fantastic. I cannot say enough good things about it. The whole layout, everything that is done from a visual standpoint looks absolutely gorgeous, and I love it. It looks like it is a literally professional Wizards of the Coast product. The only one niggling complaint I might have is if you're going to do a table of contents, you might as well put page numbers on there. But again, the whole thing's only 20 pages long, so it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But if you're going to include a table of contents, probably include numbers. And that was my other part of the pro, is the excellent layout and organization. Absolutely fantastic. Cons, most magic items simply grant the use of a spell, which just means they're not terribly interesting or clever ideas. It's just basic bare bones, like here's a thing that gives you a thing. Like if it was armor that at least, I don't know, had you do it as a reaction to something or lets you absorb the spell or do something that has to do with armor, but instead it's just like, nope, this armor just lets you cast Cure Wounds. Or, to that effect, that's just not terribly interesting to me. Cons, questionable rarity balance for items. I hesitate to put this as a con because I'm not for sure. I didn't peruse the player's handbook and really break down, okay, what is common, what is uncommon, what is attunement, what is not. But this one just had me raise a few eyebrows because of the fact that it specifically looks at things that are designed for common, which was the red flag for me, because common items are really kind of garbage tier. That's bad to say, but you know what I mean. Like they're really, really low, not supposed to be very indicative of even it's like a potion of climbing. It's like one of the few common potions that I remember because it doesn't have. I mean, it could still have combat uses, I suppose. But in other words, there's a big difference between common and uncommon, and then rare. And I think this one plays a little too loose with that. And then con, I think most of the spells are just extremely situational. By which I mean, like, how often do you have to sense a stream or make woodland creatures fear away from you, or turn a staff into a bow? I don't know. It's just. Too many of the spells I wasn't terribly interested in. Final verdict. Excellent art and professional layout elevate the otherwise by the numbers magic items and spells found in Vault of Magic. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.